Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you are new here. Today's video is special for a number of reasons. So today's video, I am going to be talking about the first time, and yes, the first time I knew I was pregnant. So today is March 15th, and it is a very special day for me because it was the due date for my first son. There's a lot of things surrounding this child that have taken a lot of time to process. And I know you guys are all probably thinking, like, you've never mentioned a child. We don't see one on your social media. That is because the story doesn't particularly have a happy ending. But I'm ready to talk about it because I think that you should talk about these things. But there is kind of a supernatural component to this as well. So I'm just going to rewind and go back to the beginning of this story. So back when I was in high school, I was dating somebody who at the time I knew had been diagnosed with a multitude of things, but as far as I was concerned, was under control and actually dealing with it just fine. Not that everybody else in my life saw it that way. And during that period of time, I was still very, very, very depressed. This was actually my grade 11 into grade 12 year. Basically, I was living in Whitehorse, and then I went back to my hometown for the summer, and all of this kind of happens during the summer. So I was dating that boyfriend, and we'd already been dating for about a year. And I went back to my hometown for the summer to work and just be able to stay at home. I was house sitting for a couple of friends, and he decided that he wanted to come and get a job as a cook in the restaurant in my hometown. So he actually came back with me. That my parents did not enjoy. And I ended up spending a very good portion of my summer with him, but I myself was not in a good place. I quite honestly knew that I had missed my period quite a number of times over the course of the spring into the summer, or I guess the beginning of the summer into the fall. And I knew that I was really stressed out, and in the past, stress had really affected my period beforehand, so I didn't really think anything of it. I figured that I was just stressed because my parents were upset with the fact that he was there, and I was really butting heads with them about me even being with him because I didn't see anything wrong at the time with the relationship. There was just a lot going on. So he was having issues on his own with his family. I was having issues with my family. I was really stressed out. Things were just not really working, and I just kind of found a place to be in my head and actually around him, and try to be happy. And one of my best friends was with me for this entire summer, and he was probably the only reason I survived for a major part of it. And so we kind of got closer to the end of the summer, and I was getting ready to go back up to Whitehorse to finish my grade 12 year and actually do like the end of high school, apply to all of the places that I wanted to go to, get into university, and just kind of start my life. But of course, as it does with depression, and the fact that in my past, I have had prior to this, about 12 suicide attempts. I was already at that place. Like, I was like, well, it would just be an end-all solution if I just didn't exist anymore. At this particular time, I actually had decided that while he was at work, my parents were busy. My mom was at work. My dad was doing stuff in the yard, as he always does. And I decided that I was going to take my own life by downing a bottle of my antidepressants as well as some ibuprofen, as among other things, and just go to sleep in the basement. Every attempt in every other way that I had done before that just hadn't worked. And I was like, I just want this to be painless and I just want to go. I did that. And I remember having the moment of, I guess, dysphoria in a way. Like, I remember the moment of feeling myself detach from what was still holding me to earth. And I do very plainly remember seeing myself laying on the air mattress in my parents' basement, and just staring down at myself in this state, knowing that I was completely, basically on my way to dying, if not already partially dead. And just thinking about how different it felt and how actually kind of good it felt. That only lasted for, what felt like forever, but it only lasted for probably about 2 to 3 minutes. And then I distinctly remember this snap back into my body. And I remember just being asleep, or unconscious, I guess. But I remember being back in my own head and back in my body, and everything was black. And something that has been very relevant throughout my entire family, and especially my mom's side of the family, is that we have, as women in my family, a lot of dreams that are very hardcore predictions of things, and just the ability to basically see what is to come in our dreams in a dream state. So I knew all of this at this point. I'd had many experiences that had happened like this, and I was back in my head, back in my body. And I remember feeling really, really, really frustrated. I was so mad that yet again, this didn't work. And I remember laying there and like talking to myself in my head, but still not actually waking up, and being really frustrated and really pissed off, and just trying to like almost talk to my soul, telling it to just let go, if that makes any sense at all. And I remember having this dream of sorts, I guess, of this guy coming out of the darkness, walking towards me. And he, was very gorgeous. I don't know how to really explain him. He had brown hair, much like I do, a little bit darker, and, built, gorgeous, basically the perfect definition of like your perfect man in any way that I could possibly explain that to somebody. But he came out of the darkness, and I remember looking at him and yelling at him. And I don't remember what I said, but I just remember yelling at him. And basically the gist of what I was saying was like, why is this not happening? Like, I just want to go. It's done. It's over. Like, it's so close. Can we just be done with this? And he kind of looked at me and he was like, no, you're not done. You have a better reason to stay. It's going to be fine. And I remember looking at him and basically telling him to go screw himself, and saying like, there's nothing that could possibly make me want to stay. And he laughed a little bit, which made me even more mad. And he basically told me to just trust him, and that it wasn't right, and that he wasn't going to allow this to happen. And I remember getting ready to start yelling at him even more. And right before my body kind of snapped back into consciousness, I remember hearing the sound of a baby crying. And it really startled me because I didn't understand why that was a thing. So I snapped back into consciousness and I started puking, and I just started really vomiting up everything that I had taken. And once that kind of suppressed itself and everything was out of my system again, I remember laying there and just being so angry that this was happening and that I was stuck here and that, you know, somebody on the other side wasn't letting me through. And I didn't know why I needed to be here. I had no idea. I remember laying there and then falling asleep again because at this point I was exhausted. I'm sure there are probably some of my viewers out there who know exactly what I'm talking about, but having a near-death experience or a full-on death experience and then coming back is an extremely exhausting thing on your body, on your soul. And I remember falling asleep and then having this dream, and this guy that I had seen before I snapped back to reality was back in my dream. But at this point, I knew I was dreaming. I knew that it wasn't just, you know, me talking to him in my consciousness or subconscious, I guess. And he was in the dream again, and he just kept making these random indications throughout the dream that just seemed totally normal. Like, it wasn't a weird dream. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary or anything like that. But he kept making indications to my stomach and just making random comments about like children and that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, yeah, like there was a time where I did want kids in the future, but like I don't want to be here anymore. So why are you even talking about this? And I remember just waking up from that dream when my boyfriend at the time got home and was like, hey, like, let's go for a walk. And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm just tired. I'm exhausted. I didn't tell him that I had tried to kill myself. Didn't tell my family. Nobody knew. As far as anybody was concerned, I just had an off day and I had like a 24-hour flu and I just didn't feel well. I remember we were getting ready to go back to Whitehorse. So we were packing everything up, getting ready to go back to Whitehorse a couple of days later. And I realized that yet again, my period hadn't come. And I remember thinking about how lethargic I was. I remember thinking about how I just didn't feel the same. And it was the first time that I had really clued into the fact that I didn't feel the same. So we got back to Whitehorse. He and I drove back together. We get back to Whitehorse, and I finally kind of decided that I was going to go and take a pregnancy test. And I can't even explain what compelled me to do it. I was just like, okay, maybe I should. Like, that might be a thing. Which also really confused me because I was on birth control. I was taking it faithfully, and we were actually pretty careful about all of that kind of thing. So it really confused me. But I decided to go and take a pregnancy test, and lo and behold, I was pregnant. And I remember feeling overwhelmed. I remember crying. I remember just panicking because I was like young and, you know, that's not really a good thing. And my parents are pretty high standing members of society in my hometown. So there was all of that and being like, what's going to happen when everybody finds out that their daughter, who is under all of this pressure, is now pregnant and she's a teenager. And it became this whole thing. But I was bound determined at that point that I was keeping the child, whether my boyfriend wanted to or not. I was totally against wanting to get an abortion. I was going to make it work. I was going to finish school. I was going to do all of those things because by the time that I would have given birth, it would have been the end of school anyway, and I could just work through whatever. Even if it took me the summer and had to do summer classes, I was ready to do it. I had it all planned out in my head. And I went and I told my boyfriend and I said, hey, just so you know, like, we're going to have this kid. And he was really excited at first, which was amazing. He was totally on board. He was so ready to just be there and be a dad. And he was a few years older than me. So he was out of high school at this point and that kind of thing. So he was like totally ready and just, I mean, as ready as you could be when your girlfriend springs it on you that she's pregnant. And we were okay for quite a while. So at this point, it was like the end of August, beginning of September, and then fast forward to around Christmas time. And at this point, I had already been to see a doctor to get an official blood test done to say that I was pregnant. But I hadn't gone in for an ultrasound yet because I was still terrified to even tell my parents. And my plan was that I was just going to like hold out as long as I could and then tell them when it was pretty obvious. I remember going home one day and seeing my boyfriend because he lived around the corner from me, and I was talking to him, and he had had a really bad fight with his dad, and I had seen his temper. I knew it existed. That was all fine and well. And he had never actually gone after me in any situation, whether it had to do with me or not. It was always like inanimate objects and whatever. And he was really good about leaving me out of the situation. But for whatever reason, that day, everything just kind of compounded, and he started redirecting his anger towards me. And I ended up being pushed down the stairs at his dad's place, which then made me panic, of course, as it should anybody. And I started really rethinking everything that was going on. And at that point, I was just thinking about the safety of me and my child. So I was really working towards figuring out what life was going to look like without him in the picture and how to get out of that relationship in the first place. Meanwhile, little did I know that that was enough trauma at this point, that I was 4.5 months pregnant, that I had actually started miscarrying. And it didn't hit me until a couple of days later that everything was really starting to happen. I had gotten a bit of spotting, but I was like, okay, well, they said that might be normal, and not really to worry about it. And then I was at work, and I worked as a cashier at Walmart, and I started bleeding heavily. And I had already told my manager at that point. She was 9 months pregnant, ready to give birth any day. She knew that I was pregnant, and she had been really gracious with me about like letting me go to the bathroom whenever I needed to, because morning sickness was definitely a thing. And all of that. So when I told her that I was 100% sure I was miscarrying, she was so good to me for the 3 days that it took for everything to happen. I ended up going in to the hospital after that and getting the official, like, this is all done and clear kind of thing. And after that, I had another dream where the same guy who originally told me I was pregnant back in August reappeared to me in my dream and kept apologizing to me and telling me that he was so sorry that this wasn't working and that I had lost the child, and that he had tried really hard to warn me throughout the months to not stay with this guy. And obviously I just wasn't remembering those dreams, or I'd blocked them from my memory because I don't remember any of that. It just became like a crushing blow. And at that point, I did know that it was a boy before all of this did happen. And I vowed at that moment that I was going to get out of the relationship for him, even though he wasn't around anymore, and that things just needed to end, because at that point, I was just furious that he had taken my child from me, as any mother would be. That has been a really big thing for me. There's a whole thing called mom sense, and like you just know, you're having a girl, you're having a boy, you're pregnant, and it just gets easier to tell all these things with the more pregnancies you have. Let me tell you, that is a thing. Mom sense is real. And we really do know when things are happening with our bodies, whether we choose to actually acknowledge it or not. It always really floored me that, all of these women on like, I didn't know I was pregnant, didn't know they were pregnant until they were literally pushing a child out between their legs. And it's like, how did you ignore all of those signs when you're eating more, you've gained weight, you've done all of these things, but you don't know that you're pregnant confused the heck out of me. All I'm trying to get at with all of this is that since then, I have not ignored any of my dreams when it comes to things that could be very real scenarios, unless I can actually pick it apart and determine what is real and what isn't, or what is just over-exaggerated and overdone. I really actually take warning from a lot of my dreams within reason, because obviously things are meant to be said when they're meant to be said. And it is a reoccurring theme throughout my family, so I probably should have just actually acknowledged it in the beginning. And maybe I could have gotten out faster, and I would have, as of today, a little 8-year-old running around the house in all of his glory. So on that note, I would just like to say, I love you, Emrys, wherever you are, so much, and I think about you every single day. If you guys have had anything similar with dreams, or your mom sense kicking into high gear, please let me know down below in the comments. I would love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications, because I do upload a video every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.